Oh, you know, Elvis was a Bronco fan right there, huh? Who was that? Freddie Mercury? Oh, okay, never mind. Never mind about that. Well, welcome. Good seeing everybody here. I'm glad you're here for this new series we're starting. 4 weeks on crazy love. And there was a very popular book came out a few years ago by the same title. This series is not based on that book, but we share the same title. But this series is about the outrageous, scandalous, irrational love of God. And I don't think there's a more important series we could engage in. And to give you an idea where we're going in the series, next week I'm going to talk about Jesus' command in John 15:11, where he said, love each other. We'll talk about that. Then the next week, Dennis Anderson's going to talk about expanding that love of God to our entire world. And then I'll follow that up the last weekend of February. I'm going to talk about the love nobody ever talks about. Jesus' command to love your enemies. This week, this first week of it, the whole series is based on this talk this weekend. And so let's jump into it. You know, one day a man came to Jesus and he said, what's the most important commandment? We know all 10 of them. Tell us which one is most important. And Jesus didn't quote any of them, none of them. He said, I'll give you the 2 most important ones. Matthew 22, verses 37 through 39. It's up on the side screens. Why don't we read it out loud together? Here we go. Love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. That's the first one. And number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus didn't talk about religion. He didn't talk about rules, rituals, regulations. He talked about relationships. He said, if you've got your relationship with God in order and you've got your relationship with other people in order, you're doing what you were put on this planet to do. Love God and love people. You can get a lot of other stuff wrong in your life. If you get those 2 right, you can get a lot of other stuff wrong in God's economy. The highest value by a factor of X is love. Love. And we forget about this sometimes. How important love is in relationships. In fact, I heard a story about a husband and wife. They were on vacation. One of them had a problem with a tooth. They found a dentist, and the wife said, I got a bad tooth. I want to get a tooth pulled. I don't want any Novocaine because we're on vacation. We want to get on our way. Just pull the tooth and we'll be gone. And the dentist looked at her, and he was quite impressed. He said, wow, no Novocaine. You're a very courageous woman. He said, show me the tooth. She turned to her husband and said, show him your tooth, dear. We forget. I forget. I get a little fuzzy on this whole thing about the importance of love. How can I get fuzzy on something God is so clear about? But I do. And today what I'm going to do, I'm going to throw out some seeds to get all of our minds thinking about the importance of God's love. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to walk through one chapter in the Bible out of Jesus' life. And the chapter is Luke chapter 6. And let me say, before we jump into that, when I first became a Christ follower, I read the Sermon on the Mount. I reread it. I studied it from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I first became a Christ follower. I memorized the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And a while ago, I read it from Luke chapter 6, just to be a little different. And again, I was awestruck when Jesus gave that famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. I was awestruck by his wisdom, his brilliance, his clarity, and the impact of that talk. And at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, verse 28 and 29, look at what it says. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, that's the Sermon on the Mount, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority, not as their teachers of the law. The people were absolutely astonished at Jesus' words. astonished at his speaking ability, astonished at his insight, his brilliance, the power that was manifested on the mountainside that day when he gave that Sermon on the Mount. That was a moment in history when he did that. And think about it for a moment, as I have. Let your mind wander, let it drift a little bit about this. As I let my mind drift, I thought, well, I'll bet there were listening in that crowd that day. Some enterprising, high testosterone, young bucks maybe in the back, listening to that sermon that day. When that sermon was over, I wouldn't be surprised. They came up to Jesus, pulled him off to the side. They said, you know, that was a great talk. You ought to take that talk on the road. That was a fantastic talk. That thing worked on the mountainside. That'd work in downtown Jerusalem. Or we could sell tickets. We could set up concession stands. We could do all of that. That was a great message. You could be big for all the right reasons. You could be big. I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens, right? Somebody finds out that they can do something really well. Somebody finds out they can do something great. Isn't the temptation to orient our whole life around that activity? Whatever we find we can do that'll get the applause of the crowd, help us gain influence, earn money, get bigger, our tendency is to orient our whole life around that. But this is what's amazing about Jesus. It's what's amazing about Jesus. Right after that shining moment in his preaching ministry, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus seems to make a deliberate choice to not do what most people do after a shining moment. Luke 7, now we're in Luke 7. It says right after the Sermon on the Mount, that huge successful talk. You know what Luke 7 verse 1 says Jesus did? Said he went home. He went to a little town called Capernaum. That's where scholars believe he was residing at the time. He didn't go to Disney World. No, he doesn't go to an agent's office, didn't hold a press conference. He goes home and surrounds himself by loving family and friends. And he's just hidden. And he's quiet for a time. And then shortly after that, he doesn't take the big show on the road. He resumes a little show. And he goes from little town to little town, bumping into and helping people along the way. And Luke 7 records, right after that Sermon on the Mount, Jesus bumps into 3 people. And I'm going to describe those situations when he bumped into those 3 people, those 3 interactions. And then I'm going to tie it all together at the end. So here's the first person he bumps into, a centurion. A centurion. Look at Luke 7, verses 1 and 2. When Jesus had finished saying all of this to the people, the Sermon on the Mount, the ones that were listening, he entered Capernaum. And there a centurion servant whom he highly valued was sick and about to die. A centurion's a Roman soldier, Roman officer, actually. And the Roman officer's got a sick servant. And the Roman soldiers were the occupying force in Judea at that time. They were not loved people. And this Roman officer, he's not sick. His servant is sick, like his shoeshine boy, his guy that shovels horse manure. That servant is sick. And he comes to Jesus, the Roman officer, because that shoeshine boy or whatever is sick. Let me ask you this. Now, if you just did something big, you astonished thousands of people. Yeah, do you want to mess with a shoeshine boy's problem? Wouldn't you be tempted to have his people call your people? You know, I could put it this way. What do you do when you're busy? What do you do when you're busy and if a friend of a friend wants you to go out of your way for him? Cousin Eddie's kid needs a job. Your brother-in-law needs help with a car payment. Your neighbor got a load of dirt for the backyard. You know, you just came off the big time. You want to mess with that stuff? I'm not sure I do. What do you think Jesus does right here? Roman soldier comes to him with a sick servant. Let's go on, Luke 2. Jesus bumps into a second person. Second person's a widow he bumps into. A widow. We'll go to Luke 7, verses 11 and 12. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a large crowd from the town was with her. It's interesting. Jesus on the move again. Here. He goes to this little town, Nain, and he's got something going on. He's got to get there, but he's interrupted by a funeral procession. What do you do when you're going somewhere? What do you do when you're going somewhere and you get delayed? You're going somewhere and you get a wrench thrown into your carefully laid plans. What do you do? How do you respond? Jesus is going somewhere, and this funeral procession stops him. He sees the widow walking behind the casket of her son, her only son, and then a lot of friends behind her. And they're going real slow. They got their headlights on, moving slow. Jesus can't crash through. I remember this happening to me not that long ago in Fort Collins. I was on College. I was late for an appointment. I'm sitting at the light, College and Horsetooth, and all of a sudden a funeral starts going by. I'm like, oh, great. I remember actually straining my head, looking how long it was. I'm hoping the dead guy didn't have a lot of friends. Phyllis told me that comment would reduce my own funeral procession in half. It would go from like 2 cars to 1. Like I'm the only one that ever thought anything like that? Come on. What do you do when something as precious as your time gets interrupted or jeopardized? What do you do when somebody makes you wait? Someone's late for an appointment. Traffic's slower than you'd like it to be. What do you do? We don't like to wait. We don't. You know, Dr. Meyer Friedman, he coined the phrase hurry sickness. Hurry sickness. He said it's something we all suffer from today. He said it kills us, hurry sickness, physically and spiritually. And incidentally, he's also the guy that identified the type A personality. You know, those people that are overdriven high achievers? He says, though, even if we're not a type A, in our culture today, just about everybody suffers from a hurry sickness of one kind or another. And just to level the playing field, let's do a little mass confession on this one. Again, I'll ask everybody here. You suffer from some form of hurry sickness in your life. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand up real high. No, well, wait, not yet. I'm not done talking. I was going to run through some categories. See, you're going, we know where you're going with it, John. Get on with it. Come on. Humor me. I'm going to run through some categories. Then, when I'm done, I'll ask you to raise your hand. We'll do mass confession on hurry. Okay? You ever find yourself thinking there's not enough hours in the day? Or you wish you had more time? Or, you know, you always feel like you're in a race. You suffer from hurry sickness. Or what about sometimes you pull up to an intersection? You know, there's 2 cars in each lane. It's at a stoplight, red light. You're deciding which car you're going to go behind. You decide which one you're going to go behind. You think which one's going to pull away faster. You look at the make, model, year of the car. Then that's the one you want to go behind. Because God forbid you'd go behind the slower car. Takes off from the light. That's hurry sickness. Oh, some people do this while they're putting on makeup. They do this whole thing. I know one person only shaves when he's in the car. I'm not making that up. Here's another one. You suffer from hurry sickness. You're in the grocery store. There's line A, line B. You're ready to check out. You look which cart that's ahead of you, how many items, you count the items, you decide which cart's gonna go out the fastest, that's the one you get behind. Then if you're real sick, you figure out where you would have been in line B if you'd have gone there. And if that person goes out and you're still in line B, they go out the store, you're depressed all day. Okay, now, how many people suffer from hurry sickness? Look at that, everybody here. We all do, we're a sick bunch. My hand's up. This is a real important distinction. Jesus was often busy. Busy is an external condition, a condition of the body. He had many things to do. He had teaching that needed to be taken care of. He had people to heal. Jesus was very busy. He was never hurried. Hurried's a condition of the soul. It is an inward condition where I'm so frantic, I'm so preoccupied, I'm unable to receive God's love. I'm unable to be present with people. I'm unable to extend love to other people. And the truth is, we can't microwave love. We can't. Just like you can't microwave raising kids. You can't do the things to build intimacy in a marriage in a hurry. We can't do the things that are required to build a great relationship with someone in a hurry. Can't listen in a hurry. You can't rejoice with those who rejoice in a hurry. We can't mourn with those who mourn in a hurry. That's Jesus' second interaction, that widow. That widow. Here's the third one. We'll jump on to the next one. This is in Luke 7:36 through 50. And this could possibly be described as the most embarrassing event of the month. See, here's this religious leader who wants to trick Jesus by asking him tricky questions. So this religious leader invites Jesus to his house for dinner. And he wants to get in a theological sparring match with Jesus. He wants to discredit Jesus. He invites him to dinner. Jesus accepts. And he comes to the dinner, and invitation's there, dinner begins, and people are looking in from the outside at this theological sparring match that's about to ensue. And in walks the third person. A call girl is number 3. The neighborhood hooker. And she takes her place at Jesus' feet. And she bursts out crying. This is an embarrassing moment. This was embarrassing for Jesus. Look at Luke 7. Pick it up at verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. I mean, what if people think she's an acquaintance of Jesus? What if people think maybe he'd been a customer? She's not going away. In fact, you read it, she's hugging his feet. And she reaches for a bottle of perfume for who knows what reason. This is not a brief moment of discomfort like Phyllis and I had when a panhandler got in our face in the Boulder Mall. It's more like what happened to me in San Francisco a number of years ago. In Chinatown, actually, I come out of a restaurant, homeless guy grabs my arm. He was in need of some type, and he wouldn't let go. There's no smooth way out of a situation like that. You just kind of go with it for a little bit. You know, you start a conversation, and you don't know what's going to happen, but you just kind of roll with it for a little bit. That's what's happening to Jesus. She's got a hold of his feet. She's not going anywhere soon. And everybody's watching. What do you think Jesus does? What does he do? What do you do when awkward, needy people, when they break into your carefully protected life? What do you do when you're caught off guard? You can't turn away. What do you do when you're confronted with people in need and you can't get out of it? Well, there you have it. Those are the three interactions Jesus had after this shining moment of giving the Sermon on the Mount, right there. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this passage, reading it over and over, thinking about it, studying it, and I go, oh man, after this huge adrenaline-filled talk that he gives, Jesus still has all kinds of love and concern for that soldier of the occupying force, and he heals the shoeshine boy. He's got all kinds of time and compassion for that widow whose funeral of her son was messing up his schedule, making him late. And he raises that widow's son back to life and gently gives him back to her. And he's got a heart full of forgiveness and grace for the call girl. And I read that, I reread it. I go, man, that is love so beyond human love, so beyond. Human love, I go, human love is so limited. This is love way beyond it. I mean, ask me to love my family, my friends, my close friends. I think I can hold my own. I do. I'll go, you ask me to love people outside that circle? I end up with all these filters, all these qualifiers. I go, okay, ask me to love somebody outside my close set of friends and family. I go, well, they better be nice, better be safe, better be stable, better be deserving at your qualifiers. Better be white, better be black, better be pro-life, better be conservative, better be a Democrat, better be a Republican, better be young, better be old, better be single, better be rich. Where do all those things come from? Where do those qualifiers come from, those filters? And let's be honest, people don't meet certain requirements of yours and mine. Human love drives up in a big hurry. Human love is so limited. God's love's not like that, as demonstrated by Jesus here. He doesn't even flinch when he's asked to heal that servant of a soldier in the occupying force. He heals him with joy. And what did Jesus do on that journey when the funeral was interrupted? I'll tell you, this cuts deep into those of us, myself included, that are prone to business and efficiency. I don't know about you, the general rule, I get interrupted, man, my heart can go cold real fast, shut down. I can go, of all the days for this. You ever say stuff like that? Of all the days for this to happen. Like when I was sitting in LAX a while ago, waiting for a flight to another town in California. 100 of us on the flight, flight's delayed 4 hours. Finally, they come on the intercom. They go, your flight is canceled. There's a flight that's available right across the hall. Last flight out tonight to that city. Last one. One problem, there's 100 of you, there's 30 seats. It's first come, first serve. I mean, there was not a lot of love being expressed. People weren't going. I didn't see anybody going, you go ahead. No, you go. No, you go. Maybe I didn't see them because I was crawling over seats at such a high rate of speed. That's the way human love is. When it gets thrown off kilter, right? When it gets messed up, human love shuts down. Enter the incredible, crazy love of God. Here's Jesus. Delayed, yes. Frustrated, angry? No. The text says, look at it, Luke 7:13. When the Lord saw her, when he saw the widow walking behind the casket of her only son, his heart went out to her. One Bible I saw said, his heart overflowed with compassion. And he said, don't cry. And the scriptures lead us to believe he'd never met her before. He didn't know her, raised her son back to life just like that. And we see this all through the pages of Scripture, where Jesus sincerely, eagerly, almost recklessly loves people outside the circle, shows a reckless kind of love to the poor, the maimed, outcast, forgotten, riffraff, rich, poor, different races, ethnicities, socioeconomic standings. Not many limits to his love. And every time I think about it, I'm moved. I'm moved by this kind of love. I am. So beyond human love. I'm drawn by it. I'm melted by it. And I want to receive more of it. And I want to imitate this kind of love in my own life. I want my capacity to love people to increase. I want to be able to give love away, broader and wider, without the filters. I want to be able to express love across racial lines, ethnic lines, socioeconomic lines, political lines, gender lines. And I think many of you, I think you long for the same thing. And what about the crying call girl? Jesus doesn't push her away to protect his reputation. No. And no doubt there were people there thought they had met before. Jesus doesn't slam dunk her for wrong moral choices in the past. He doesn't turn to her and give her a here's how you turn over a new leaf sermon. No. What does he do? He looks into her eyes. He sees her tears. He knows her heart is real. And he quietly says to her, Luke 7:48, he says, it's over. Your sins are forgiven. The past has been wiped clean. Imagine how that weeping call girl felt. Actually, some of us can imagine how she felt. Some of us can imagine that because some of us remember the day when we came to Jesus in the middle of our guilt and our shame. And some of us cried. We cried like she did. And we said those words. We said, I don't think there's any way. God, I don't think there's any way I could ever be forgiven for what I've done. I don't think there's any way I could be loved and accepted by God. I think lots of you can remember that day, can't you? Hearing inaudibly the words of Jesus when he said to you, I see your tears, and I know your heart, and it's over. You're mine. You're forgiven. Salvation I give to you as a gift. You know, when I heard those words over 30 years ago, I was not just overwhelmed by the love of God. I was transformed by this love. And I'm hoping that many of you, if you haven't been transformed by it yet, that you will be. You will be. And I said to myself after reading all this, looking at how Jesus treated the prostitute, I go, you know what? I want to be a more loving, grace-filled, forgiving person to people in my life that have messed up. I want to lower the expectations. I want to lower the standards. I want to lower the demands that I make on people around me. And I want to be known as someone who gives grace freely. And what struck me on this whole thing, remember Jesus after this huge moment, Sermon on the Mount, he seems more dedicated than ever to just get back to the daily rigors of living and loving people around him, living with them and loving people around him. And at people that he bumps into that he had never met before. To Jesus, that was the big deal. That stuff there, that was the big deal. And I'm beginning to understand for Jesus, those everyday interactions with a soldier, shoe shine boy, a widow, call girls, for him, that was the big deal. That was the big deal right there. Those were irretrievable opportunities to give and receive what he called the most important thing: love. Let's bow our heads together. God in heaven, I do remember so clearly the day your Your incredible love invaded my life. And I could say without hesitation, I'll never forget that day, and I'll never forget what it felt like to have my empty heart filled with your love. To this day, I still can't get over it. And I'm so glad that the core of my life has been changed by your love. The core of my life has been changed by your Son, Jesus Christ. And anyone here who's never received the love of God through Jesus, just pray with me. Just say, Jesus, come into my life. I want your love. I need your love in my life. I want your forgiveness. And I give myself to you. And I trust you. I want to follow you. And I want to give my whole life completely to you today. And God, I thank you for those that have prayed that prayer right now. And God, I thank you that you're the kind of God who you stand with loving arms wide open for those that are here that weren't ready to pray that prayer today, but they will someday. Thank you for the loving God that you are. In Jesus' name.